Um, Hi everybody, my name is Natasha and welcome to Íslendingaspjall með hreim. Today we're going to speak about this myth that Icelandic is one of the most difficult languages in the world, which is widely spread in Iceland. And we have four guests that I'm going to introduce. We have Richard Simcott, a hyperpolyglot who's been studying a lot of languages, 30. As I remember, he speaks 7. I'm sorry if I say it wrong, on a native level, and 16 on a fluent level. He's been studying Icelandic in Iceland in the summer course 2013. And he can share his experience in learning Icelandic. We have Jón Símon Markússon, who is first teacher in the University for Icelandic as a second language of foreigner region. We have Artёm Ingmar Benediktsson, who has been done research in multicultural integration. And we have Stanićević. I hope I pronounced your surname correct. Stanićević, who is also teaching Icelandic and also a translator and an author. So I'm going to start with a question to you, Richard. As a person who's been studying languages for many years and have a lot of experience in it, how did you find learning Icelandic? Was it any difficult for you, and compared to other languages, how difficult it was for you? And also, I'd like to hear if Icelandic language is any special language in language learner society community.
Yeah, so I mean, Icelandic actually, I think, compared to other languages with a similar number of speakers, tends to be way more popular. I don't know whether it's because Iceland as an island nation, or the old sagas, or the attraction of the beautiful nature in Iceland, but it does seem to get a lot of attention. And if you compare it to other languages that are even spoken by way more people than Icelandic as a first language, like my home language, Macedonian, which has very few materials for learners and doesn't tend to be as studied. And we definitely don't have as many foreigners living in the country where they speak the language well. I mean, just on this call, there's 4 of you that speak Icelandic to a very high level, and then me. And then in terms of my experience with Icelandic, I can't say that it's, I mean, ridiculously impenetrable. It's definitely not to the degree I think that Icelanders would like to think it is. I think that one of the issues with Icelandic for people learning the language comes when Icelanders switch to English very quickly for them. That's one of the common issues that I've heard. And it's not so much the language, but the ability to practice language. Now, Icelandic does have quite involved grammatical cases, and that can provide some obstacles for a learner. So, of course, to get all of that correct and to speak in sort of perfect grammar, which unfortunately I don't think anyone actually does ever, 100% of the time anyway, in any language, they can sometimes be issues where the speaker psychologically will have these barriers because the sort of, you're told how hard it is by Icelanders and by some people that would like to sort of just sell it as that, really. And the truth of the matter is that pretty much every language in the world, there's always a community that will think that their language is the hardest. You know, if you go to Poland, they will tell you Polish is the hardest language. Even Macedonians think that Macedonian is the hardest language, or it's one of the hardest languages. It's very difficult for foreigners, and it's just not true. There are definitely other languages that I think would present, in terms of getting basic phrases out, more of a problem than Icelandic to people learning a language as a second language. And the fact that in Iceland, actually, I've met and know quite a lot of people who study Icelandic as a second language and do it to a very high level. As I say, some of you are on this call today. Just shows that it can't be that impenetrable of a language. It's just, I think, in Iceland, there needs to be an understanding that people need to start somewhere with the language. And I've not had this issue myself, but I know other people may have had. And it's to encourage Icelanders to say, we want to embrace your culture, we want to embrace your beautiful language. And the way to do that is by learning and by getting things wrong, and then later getting them right.
Yeah, I agree. Like, there is quite an issue when Icelanders skip to English, but we'll talk about it a little bit later. Artёm, I also want to ask you, because you studied a lot of languages as well. I know you have a BA in Danish, you teach in Danish and Norwegian, you have BA in Chinese, you speak fluent Icelandic and English, and mother tongue is Russian. So how did you find Icelandic? Was it difficult for you compared to other languages that you've learned?
Yeah, well, I don't like this definition, difficult language. I don't think there is any language that is difficult because it's all very relative. And we should always ask difficult for whom. And because I work in the field of critical multiculturalism, what we consider difficult is always considered from a Western point of view. So we always kind of decide that a normal learner or just a regular learner is someone from Europe or Western learner. But the majority of people actually are non-Westerners. So what about like Chinese people? They actually think that English is very difficult language because it's so different for them. But if they start to learn, for example, Japanese or Vietnamese, they think it's quite easy to learn them. But in Western tradition, Chinese or any basically Asian language considered to be super difficult. So no, I don't think Icelandic is a difficult language, and it just takes time and practice, of course, and effort. You cannot learn any language without investing your time and trying to speak and trying to also learn about culture. And I think in order to start actually speaking, you also need to embrace the culture, and you need to communicate with people, you need to be open. And these are just so many ways to learn language rather than just doing it from a book, which I don't think is the best way. So no, I don't think it's difficult. And as I said, I don't think there is any language in the world that is difficult for everyone.
Yeah, I agree. Jón, you've been teaching Icelandic for quite a while, and there are a lot of students who went through you during this time. And I always wonder, is there such a thing that you need to have a talent to study language, and there are people who are just simply not capable of learning foreign languages? For me, it's all about your interest. Like, for example, I like learning languages, and I think it's very interesting, and I enjoy doing it, and I do it on my free time. And once I tried to study programming, and I saw that I took an online course, and I was like, okay, I can do that. But there were a lot of people who were like, oh my God, but can you do it like this? But why did you do it like this? And I simply didn't care. I didn't find it interesting, and I didn't really have any motivation to do that. So my question for you is do you think is it a matter of interest, or do you actually need something in yourself that makes you a good language learner?
I think interest definitely facilitates language learning, without a doubt. I'm like you. I learn languages, and like Richard, and probably like everybody else on this call, I learn languages in my free time. It's a way for me to de-stress. Yeah, so interest definitely does help. You know, and we tend to, as a teacher, I can say that I often see a correlation between the people that get as close to native proficiency as it's possible to get. They tend to be extremely keen language learners, and they have a history of learning various foreign languages. But I agree with Artёm. I mean, what Artёm said before is he said very eloquently, and I fully agree with him. You know, language is a cultural tool, and learning something from a book it might suit some people. You know, I've tried it that way, and it kind of turned out all right. But I think immersion in culture is, whether you're interested or not, is the key to learning a language, basically. So whether you enjoy it or not, you know, I mean, past the age of, I don't know, 12 or whatever, people have kind of solidified themselves in the context of the societies that they were brought up in. They might have a cultural identity. So, you know, if you don't necessarily feel like you want to become or integrate into a new culture, then maybe the carrot for learning the language isn't there. But if people are immersed long enough in a culture, then they'll pick it up, whether they're interested or not. You know, I mean, I remember when I was first learning Icelandic, I was working on a farm, and I learned to call for help because there were massive cows running towards me and stuff like that. You know, I mean, immersion in certain circumstances, whether you're interested in, I'm not interested in farming at all, but I kind of was immersed in it. And I can talk about the countryside and farming better in Icelandic than I can in my native language, which is English, because I never spent any time on a farm in England. I may be rambling somewhat, but I think there is a relationship a correlation between interest in language learning and proficiency. But given enough time, I think, you know, anyone can pick up a language, and they'll do it through their own means. They'll do it through their own motivation as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Richard, I also want to ask you the same question, because you live in like language learning environment. Have you ever came across people who have a very big interest to learn like language learning, but they just like struggling with it?
People have a number of things that they struggle with when language learning, as I see it. One of them is that they just don't do very much and expect results. That's the number one thing that I notice, that they talk a lot about it. They often don't know what to do, so they will waste the time that they have trying to study because they don't feel that they've got sort of a path to follow. So they won't really know what to do, or they will just sort of get involved in talking more about it than actually doing it, not setting themselves proper time. To my mind, if you're learning a language, you need to treat it with the same kind of respect as you would a partner or a business associate, that you would set proper times to do it. For people who just love learning languages, obviously that just comes naturally, and they don't necessarily need that in the same way. But if we're talking about people who are new to language learning particularly, they don't have that same habit. And so it's really important that we have contact with the language on a regular basis in different ways and forms. So whether it's reading, whether it's listening to the language, whether it's speaking the language, whatever it is, and I would definitely suggest a mixture of all of those things. Trying to write it as well, perhaps. These kinds of things are really important to have and to do things that you enjoy doing through the language. So what people will often do is they just won't know what to do at all. And then, as I say, have a goal, and then as the sort of their goal approaches, or the time that they had set for the goal to approach. Like, in 3 months, I want to be able to have a conversation Icelandic. And then they get to the 3-month period and they still haven't done it because they didn't really know what to do, and they didn't spend very much time with the language really. And then what happens is the sort of this almost depression sets in of, oh, aren't I terrible? Because, you know, the biggest hater we have is the one living in our heads that tells us how terrible we are at doing something. And then any books that we've had on the shelf just scream at us and say that we failed to learn that language yet again. And the truth of the matter is that actually with some support and encouragement and learning to use the time effectively is all that's needed. And knowing that the language isn't going to go in by osmosis, that there is going to be an effort required, there is going to be time investment required. I agree with Jón Símon and with Artёm that this can move forward and it can work. And yeah, I mean, for some people it's going to take more than others. You know, for another Scandinavian language speaker, as Artёm very rightly said, the process may be a lot easier because a lot of the vocabulary will be shared. For somebody who speaks, you know, a language like Georgian, then of course the language is far removed. So it's going to take a bit more time and effort. Things like verbs, having things like strong verbs in Icelandic is something that's characteristic of the Germanic group of languages. So if you speak a Germanic language, certain things like that are going to be obvious to you. Even if you don't realize it yet, they're going to make sense almost instinctively. So whereas for somebody who speaks Georgian, that's a completely different ballgame. So yeah, the time, the effort, and the regularity of contact with the language, they're all the important things that we need to do. And they're the things that I think people fall down on most. And then also being realistic with your time and what you've got to do. So knowing when you actually have time, not pretending that you've got 48 hours in one day when you don't. You have to sleep, you have to eat, you have work to do, you have family, friends and things to do. And so it's really important as well when we set goals, that we set goals that are realistic. And we reassess those goals regularly to make sure that we haven't been excessive in what we expected to achieve, to set ourselves up for failure and then have those other issues come back. Psychological impact of not having met the goals that were, in essence, unrealistic in the first place.
Yeah, I actually want to add something from me, because I think it's also important not to overwhelm yourself when you study a new language and find the right way to do that. I think it's also important. Anna, I have a question for you. Unlike Richard and Jón, your mother tongue is not Germanic but Slavic. Your mother tongue is Serbian. And I was wondering, did you have any mistakes coming from Serbian? I know that you, I think you knew Danish or Norwegian before you studied Icelandic, so it might have helped you. But do you usually have any mistakes that come from your language when you study foreign language?
That's a very interesting question, because like you said, I had studied the Scandinavian languages previously to studying Icelandic. So I was already fluent in Norwegian at that time. And I had been teaching Norwegian actually at the University of Belgrade before moving to Iceland. So I think I kind of entered Icelandic more from that Scandinavian perspective. And I feel like, you know, my mind was set in that modus. And obviously, I mean, you know, Serbian being also a case language and having, you know, 7 cases and all of that has certainly helped if something, you know, in acquiring and understanding, you know, the system of the Icelandic language. I'm not sure about the mistakes. Actually, I kind of realized at some point that there are some things that I found kind of illogical in Icelandic that I later on came to realize are exactly the same in my mother tongue. So maybe I should have relied more on Serbian when actually acquiring Icelandic. So I'm not sure. Perhaps you know, it's maybe hard for me to say that, but I think I had, you know, obviously a different starting point than just a Serbian speaker at the time of learning Icelandic. So, yeah, I kind of wanted to add because there were so many interesting points before I got the chance to speak about language learning and immersion. I think that's very interesting because, for example, I studied Norwegian actively at the University of Belgrade before even moving to Norway and traveling there for the first time. So I had already reached some sort of fluency before visiting Norway for the first time. And even when I started teaching there, I had students who had never been to Norway who were studying the language. And I think it's really interesting that motivation can really do a lot for you. Because sometimes I experienced, after having taught Icelandic here later on in Iceland at the University of Iceland to people who live here, it's not necessarily. I mean, obviously, it's a bonus. It's your advantage. But if you don't use it actively, I think if you don't use your advantage, then it doesn't really help that much. Because I felt like students were learning, Norwegian in Belgrade, maybe at the same rate, or maybe not at the same rate, but as successfully as some students were learning Icelandic here at the University of Iceland, and that might come as an illogical thing, but I think it has something to do with what Richard was saying, and that sometimes people have this idea, oh yeah, I want to do this, but they don't really realistically assess what their what kind of effort they should put into it. It's not enough just to wish something. Of course, it's very important, but it's not enough. So in that sense, engaging with the culture that's around you already, and language that's at your disposal, like everywhere you look, is really important. And of course, some students are smart enough to do that, and they do that. But I feel like some people miss that opportunity as well. And maybe it has something to do with this fear of Icelandic, and this myth that you started your talk with about Icelandic being the most difficult language in the world. So they kind of have this barrier to begin with, and that's a pity, that's a shame. And I think everyone who has taught Icelandic here or at the University of Iceland, my colleagues and Jón Símon and me and all the others, I'm sure we use a lot of time, trying to explain, trying to kind of break the myth and kind of point out the similarities between Icelandic and some other Germanic languages, or whatever you can give to people from different language areas as a tool to acquire Icelandic is a good thing. And I think we all kind of have this focus of kind of demystify, what do you call it, like taking the myth away from the whole Icelandic is the most difficult language, Godzilla kind of idea.
Yeah, Artёm, I also would like to ask you about the same question, because your mother tongue is Russian. Did you find any difficulties learning Icelandic, or did it help you? Like, for example, for me as a native Russian speaker, I always have difficulties with articles because they don't exist in Russia. And I think I just simply don't have this part in my brain that understand it. Why do you need it if you can simply not use them? So I know in all languages that I learn, I always have difficulties with articles. How about you? Do you have any problems coming from Russian in your language acquisitions?
It's a good question. I think that the main problem is with syntax and word order in sentences, because it's pretty different in Russian, and you can pretty much mix words freely in a sentence, and especially with adverbs, placing adverbs, it's pretty free in Russian syntax, while in Icelandic and other Scandinavian languages there are fixed positions, especially with negations in sentences. And I struggled at the beginning when I started learning Icelandic, and I can also hear from my friends who are native Russian speakers who speak Icelandic I hear these problems with word order and structure. And sometimes people use double negations in the same sentence, which is not acceptable, as we all know for Icelandic. And also, you know that I have been married to Icelander for almost 10 years and have been with him for almost 11 years. And actually, he can say when someone speaks Icelandic whether this person has a Slavic language as native or not, because Guðmundur, he says that he can spot the Slavic native speaker by word order, and especially the position of adverbs, because he heard it so many times from me, and he corrected me. And when he meets a new person who speaks Icelandic, and he can say whether this person has Slavic native language or not, so it says something.
Interesting. Anna, one question for you. I know that you write and translate in all the languages that you study, as far as I understand. So I would like to ask you, at what level do you feel comfortable to start doing that? And also, do you feel like it helps you fast forward your progress in the language? And also, because you do so much with Icelandic language, you translate. I know you translated Sjón to Serbian. I know that you translate from Serbian to Icelandic, which I find fascinating. So, like, is there anything like special for you with Icelandic, or do you treat all languages that you study the same way?
Wow. You know what they say, you can't make a difference between your children, right? I don't know, I feel the same about languages. Of course, maybe Icelandic has a special place in my heart for some reason, but your first question was about, if at what point I feel secure and, to actually produce a language and write in it. Well, I think we have actually talked about it before, but, of course, it's different. It's very good. It's a good training to write, whatever you write. And of course, I've written also some articles, academic articles in all of these languages. And this comes at some point when you're, ready for it. But when it comes to writing poetry and like you're something that you do, because you're kind of you're forced to or something. You have a feeling that you need to do that. I think that always happens kind of like. In the beginning, very soon for me, because I feel very excited about the idea to explore the language in this other way as well, like creatively. And I think it's, of course, just a great thing. And, I find that I also learn from it, obviously. And it's just a part of my, I guess, maybe language learning process as well. Of course, this changes through time as you get maybe better in the language, and then maybe you have a different idea or a different motivation for writing, even if it's poetry. But I think for sure it's something that, just builds your, I guess, self worth in the language, and it just opens up new possibilities and the kind of has the, it lets you play with the language in a bit more carefree way, which I think is very important, because you can't learn a language if you're taking yourself too seriously either. I think it has a lot to do with your ego and, letting go of it, and being not afraid of being a child in a language again, for how many times or at whatever age. So it's definitely a helpful thing for me.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting because I also write in Icelandic and translate, and I think for me, it is also about the language. So literature is about language, and language learning is about language. So I really I love language in all the ways possible. But now I'd like to talk about society and acceptance of foreigners in Iceland, because I think we all have experienced different kind of unacceptance because of the accent, because we are foreigners. I personally experienced it quite a lot. once I remember, it wasn't even so long ago, I met a friend of mine who is Russian speaker. She works in a shop, so I stopped by and we were speaking Russian together. And her boss, she was like, "Why do you speak Russian together? You both speak Icelandic." and I was like, wow, okay. Also, there was like another time when I was in a cafe and I was speaking with my Russian-speaking friend. There was like a big table and there was an Icelandic woman sitting not too far away from us. And she had to go to the closed toilet, and she turned to us and asked in English, "Do you mind like to have a look at my stuff while I'm in the toilet?" And what surprised me that she just assumed, just because we were speaking Russian, that we don't speak Icelandic in Iceland, which I find very interesting. I was living for 3.5 years in Sweden, and I never experienced such thing in Sweden, because they don't skip to English. If you don't understand something, they will explain it to you in Swedish, while here people just answer you in English. And sometimes I would have ridiculous conversations with people in Icelandic and English while I was speaking Icelandic, and Icelanders would answer to me in English. And I remember there was an older couple who, I work in a bookshop, and there was an older couple who asked me something, and I was answering them in Icelandic, and I could see they were struggling with their English. And the woman, she would turn to her husband, asked in Icelandic, "How do you say it in English?" He would answer, then she would turn to me and say it in English. I was answering her in Icelandic that I speak Icelandic. And she was like, "Okay, good, but do you have this thing?" She kept talking in English. So I found it very interesting. And I think a lot of Icelanders are still not used to hear accent. And my first question would be to you, Jón, because I know that your pronunciation is like perfect. I've heard when you also worked in a bookshop, I heard this story when nobody knew that you were a foreigner. And once they heard you speaking British English, and they were like, "Wow, your English is so good. Did you live there?" And you were like, "No, I'm British." How did you master pronunciation? Do you just sit down and like train it? Or is it because, like, I've heard such thing that people who sing, who are good at singing, they master the pronunciation much better than people who don't. Like, how do you do that? I think you are muted. Yeah.
Oh, am I still muted?
No.
No. Okay. I sing. I also sing beautifully. But no, I don't. Learning pronunciation has never been an issue for me. It just comes quite naturally, I think. I mean, you know, sometimes I might have to repeat a sound or a word containing that sound a few times, but it tends to come pretty naturally. It's never been something that I found difficult. I've had students that, particularly older students, the last time I heard this was from a Hungarian student. She was in her 40s, early 50s maybe. And I was pronouncing the difference in Icelandic between ear and air. And she said, "I just don't hear it. I don't hear the difference." And she couldn't produce the difference either. That's never been something that has been an issue for me. So, I mean, of course, I have to sit down and learn which sounds exist in the language, but that's about as far as it goes. Yeah. But I, you know, when I first came to Iceland, of course, my Icelandic wasn't great. The thing is, my pronunciation was very good. So people thought that I was maybe a native speaker of Icelandic, which is really, really stupid. Because the rest of it, everything beyond pronunciation, was terrible. Now, hopefully that's changed.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm kind of like, I think singing and having good hearing help. Like for me, I don't sing. I'm quite bad at it, and I think I might never be able to get rid of an accent. Artёm, talking about acceptance in society, I know, as you mentioned before, you've been married to an Icelander for many years. You have Icelandic family. You live in Icelandic environment. You even have Icelandic name somehow. Do you feel like it made you more part of the society, like having all this like connection to Iceland? Do you feel like you are more part of society rather than you were before? But also, I have two questions for you. The second one would be about work, because I know you are very like educated. You spent a lot of years in the university. You have 3 BA degrees, you have master's degree, you have PhD degree. But I also know that there were periods of time when you struggled finding a job. Do you think it's connected to your foreign name?
So, good questions. First of all, of course, I think that the fact that I have so strong connection to Iceland through my husband really helped, because he has a huge family, a huge Icelandic family, and we celebrate all the holidays with them. I communicate with many children in the family, and it helps to get all these small things that you will never learn at the university. You learn something from children that they learn in kindergartens. You learn all these cultural references, something, that is never said in any of the books on Icelandic, and it definitely helped. And of course, when I encountered any problems, bureaucratic problems, I could always ask my Icelandic family, and they were super helpful. And with the language, they are very open and they're very supportive. They have never ever spoken any other language than Icelandic to me, even at the very, very beginning, when sometimes I struggled a little bit, but they just kept talking Icelandic and explain things, and very understanding of my need to learn Icelandic and to adapt and integrate into the Icelandic society, and it definitely helped. And I have been always working in Icelandic environments, so it helped, of course, to communicate with my colleagues and everyone. And I think this is important also to communicate with different ages, because it's important also to find maybe Icelandic friends who have children and communicate also with their children to get all these cultural references. And what was the second part of the question? I just, sorry.
About work, difficulties finding work if you connect it with your foreign name.
Yes, I think it's generally difficult, and it's an obstacle. If you have a weird non-Icelandic name, that of course employers will find a little bit strange, and they just don't trust that you speak enough Icelandic. It's unfortunately a reality, and I know that some people have been changing names and seeing the difference. But I wouldn't necessarily blame everything on the name, because if you have like personal desire to work, and if you're looking for a job, if you just don't give up and continue looking, you will eventually find a job, and you will find a company or organization that is interested in you and sees you as a value but not as a problem. Because what I often see and hear, and also through my research, I see that organizations and also educational institutions, they look at foreigners or immigrants first as a problem. So they need to change their mindset. They need to look at all these multicultural, beautiful people as a resource, because they bring knowledge, they bring their culture, and they bring their experiences to enrich the whole society. So if the mindset will be changed, and if all people will be treated as value or asset, but not as a problem, everything would be easier. And I think when employers see on a CV foreign name, not non-Icelandic name, they'll think, oh, this can be a problem for me. But they need to change that and think, oh, this person probably speaks more than Icelandic, or probably has broader experience. This is a plus. I think this is the key.
Yeah, I totally agree. I personally see that as well as Natasha Stolerova. Yeah, I rarely get to go to the interviews even. I feel like I'm qualified to the positions that I applied to. So I hope it will change at some point. Anna, I would like to talk to you about Icelandic language because well, yeah, that's what we've been doing here. But I think Iceland is a little bit, like not a little bit, but proud about their language and their heritage. And they do a lot of things to support it and to preserve it. They have this Day of Icelandic Language. They don't borrow words. They try to make up their own versions. They have Word of the Year, and I actually have never seen such things in other societies, such a big pride in their language. And I feel like you are a part of it. You always like make it visible, like on your social media and stuff like that. But my question to you would be, do you think because they don't want to speak Icelandic, or like it comes natural to them to skip to English with foreigners. Do you think it's their conscious way to preserve it? Like they don't want to share it with foreigners?
Well, if that's the case, then it's a bad strategy, I would think, because I've been experiencing this, extreme interest in Iceland and Icelandic by foreigners, like a huge strength and bonus for the language and its preservation as well. I mean, just look at the, for example, researchers, just at the University of Iceland, researchers who are dealing with medieval studies, Old Icelandic and so on. Most of them are of foreign origin, and of course nowadays the largest, department, the University of Iceland, is Icelandic as a second language. So I definitely think that would be a bad strategy if that is the case. But I think it's changing. I think the idea of not sharing the language doesn't really come from that wish to kind of keep it to themselves. It's more just like not being used to having a non-Icelandic people speak Icelandic. But I think that has definitely changed and is changing. I think we are definitely contributing to these changes as well, and a lot has changed since I first moved to Iceland 10 years ago, and I can definitely see the shift. And also what you mentioned before about people switching to English if they see that you are maybe not Icelandic, if you look different than I don't know a typical Icelander, or if you don't speak Icelandic fluently. I think this has also changed a lot, and of course it doesn't mean that it will not occur. But I think it's also important to try to educate people, and if one experiences a situation like that, then I probably would be a good idea just say here I am trying to learn this language. Would you be kind to speak Icelandic to me, back to me? But of course, I think it's still, unfortunately, I think it's ingrained in people's minds that as soon as they see the name, that there's a foreign name, then immediately they would switch. And I think we've all had this experience at some point. maybe engaging with the person for a long time in Icelandic, and then mentioning that you come from another country, and then they would just switch to English, which is completely ridiculous. It has something to do with this, this idea that, only Icelanders speak Icelandic. But luckily, this is changing, and I think this is only for the better, and for the for the betterment and preservation of Icelandic language as well.
Yeah, I actually was also wondering if it's changing or not, because the better you speak Icelandic, the less it happens to you that people switch to English. So I'm actually not sure if it's changing for us, for people who speak Icelandic on a daily basis, and still happening with people who just studied in the beginning, or is it like general shift in the society because there are more and more people who speak Icelandic? So I'm not sure about that. But talking about accent, Richard, you mentioned that Icelanders skip to English, but I know that you also studied some other small languages, like Albanian. I think it's quite a small language as well. Do you think this unacceptance of foreigners speaking a language is something that is common in small languages? But also the second language for you would be, I'm pretty sure you face different reactions to the accent in different languages that you study. Does it still hurt your feelings when you hear some comments, or when people skip to English with you? Or have you already accepted that people can react differently and you just let it go?
A really interesting question, actually. I mean, I heard that issue in Iceland. Actually, I've never experienced it myself in Iceland, I have to say that. Every time I've been to Iceland and engaged with people in Icelandic, even though my Icelandic is nowhere near the level of the people on this call, I've always had Icelandic back. And I've never had people, unless I've said, "Oh, I'm a bit stuck here, let's go," but then they seem quite happy to speak Icelandic with me. And I don't know if that's because of the Germanic. We already have the and the sounds quite naturally in English, and my dialect of English has kind of a ch sound, and also I'm a Welsh speaker, so I also have a which is similar to the bit like sound in Icelandic, so maybe that helps. But in terms of generally swapping languages, I think a lot of it is to do with how well the average speaker speaks English, particularly English, and whether they pride themselves in doing that, whether they have a lot of tourists and are therefore used to many people coming and not speaking the language. So as soon as they hear an accent, they think, oh, they're making an effort, that's really sweet, but I'll make your life easier and help you by switching to English. And that's definitely something that you see in places like the Netherlands. Some parts of Scandinavia will do a similar thing. And Iceland being part of that sort of group, I would say. Do I get offended? Absolutely not. I think people do it usually from a very good place. They're trying to help you. Sometimes, like you said with your story in the bookshop, it can become a mental block that they don't get it. I had a similar story when I lived in the Netherlands. I spoke Dutch, I learned it. The first 6 months, I was still picking things up, but it's another Germanic language, and it's very similar to English in a lot of ways. And I didn't have any issues. But then one day I went to buy a plane ticket. I was talking for maybe half an hour to the person who was selling me the ticket. And then as soon as I produced my UK passport, all of a sudden the person switched to English. And I said, and I just said, do you know what? I haven't forgotten my Dutch in the time that I handed over my passport to you. I can still speak it. But there was kind of a mental block. And I think it's because of foreigners being in a country visiting. They're just so used to doing it that it almost is something automatic. You mentioned Albanian. My experience with Albanian actually is people are so happy when I say anything in Albanian that they just will speak to me in Albanian. So, I mean, in Skopje, we have a number of languages that are spoken. There are lots of different ethnicities. So the main language, which is my home language, is Macedonian. We also have Albanian, we have Turkish, we have Serbian, we have the Romani language, we have Vlach, which is spoken in the country, and they all have official status in different parts of the country, which I'm very proud of the country, actually. It's the only country in the world that has an official status for a language like Romani in the world, and Vlach, a Romanian, in the world. And I find that people here tend to be quite happy when you speak. Macedonian speakers and Serbs in Serbia, Serbian speakers, because they like speaking English and it's a prestige language, you do find that they want to practice it with you. I don't particularly get this normally. They do look at me like a cat is meowing at them sometimes, because I do not look Balkan in any way. So as soon as they see me, they don't expect the local language. So when I go to Serbia and I speak Serbian, or when I'm here and I speak Macedonian, if they don't know me, then they look at me and a cat might as well be talking at them, because they're just freaked out by it. But generally they speak to me in the local language. Albanians particularly, actually, even if they speak Macedonian better than I speak Albanian, I speak Macedonian better than I speak Albanian, absolutely. They will still go with the Albanian, which is for me a bit weaker, because they're so happy and proud that I'm speaking their language. So I found that quite interesting. So no, and I actually don't notice that as a commonality between these groups. Some things that I have noticed are, for example, my own ethnicity, Welsh. Welsh speakers tend more and more to support people speaking Welsh. When I was younger, if somebody had an accent in Welsh, they would switch straight to English. Nowadays, people want to encourage other people to speak, because we've got this initiative in Wales for us to reach 1 million Welsh speakers by 2050. So we have this goal, right? At the moment, we're kind of at 600,000 speakers, so double that of Iceland, roughly. But even in a place like Wales, where obviously people are completely bilingual, I mean, everybody speaks English to the level of people in England, sometimes better. But there was still a number of people nowadays will take the time with you to sort of work with you to help you improve your Welsh. So no, and I think Iceland is possibly going in the same direction. At least I hope so, from what I'm hearing on this call.
Yeah, thank you. We have 3 people here who are working in the education, Artёm, Jón, and Anna. And I would like to maybe start with Artёm and ask you this question. So there are 15% of the population of foreign origin in Iceland. And still we have the situation of kind of not acceptance of foreigners. And I kind of get this feeling that Icelanders don't expect foreigners to speak Icelandic. Like if you look at this test for the citizenship that everybody have to take to be able to get citizenship, it's very, very basic. Like nobody expects you to speak good Icelandic. There are no free classes for foreigners. For example, in Sweden, they have free classes for foreigners. Getting BA in Icelandic wouldn't necessarily help you to find a job or anything. So it's basically 3 years just for you. And as a person who works in education, who've been doing researches in multicultural education, working with people who study Icelandic, who don't speak Icelandic, do you think those things should be changed? Like, do you think we should have free language classes? Do you think we should have more difficult tests? I think you're the only one here who actually took this test. So do you think we should change the system to improve Icelandic level among foreigners?
Yeah. Well, first of all, about the test, I found it to be actually very offensive that they have so low expectations to our Icelandic levels that they just, it was like for kindergarten, and it wasn't a test, it was a torture when you just sit and they repeat in this super, super slow pace, like Þetta María. Hún 25 ára. And then there comes the questions, what's her name? And you get the actually multiple choices. So it's like, it was offensive that they have so low expectations towards immigrants who learn Icelandic and who would like to become actually a citizen in this country. And also, I would like to comment a little bit on what Richard said. Of course, I understand that people coming from a good place, that they want to help immigrants and speak English to them because they feel like it will be easier. But it's also they are sending a message to this person so that you don't belong to our society, you don't belong to our linguistic community, you're just outsider. Rather than just, as you said, an example with Albanians, they are happy to speak, they are happy to accept you to their linguistic community. And it hurts sometimes people's feelings when they've been living for, I don't know, I know people who have been living for 20 years in Iceland and who still get replies in English, or who just look different and they walk in the bank and they get just right away, what do you need? How can we help you in English? So there is very little trust, and it can hurt people's feelings. And with education, of course, there should be a better support because a lot of people, especially in the University of Iceland, are talking about that we need more courses in English to be more international, to give better opportunities. Of course, it is important, especially if we want to have more exchange students, if we want to have more international students. But if we want to improve like well-being of our immigrants who study in Icelandic, it's not the case that we need to provide courses in English, because sometimes their English is worse than Icelandic and their Icelandic is better. We need to provide better support in Icelandic. There should be more courses in Icelandic at different levels, not just the beginner level, because sometimes people just get stuck at the beginner level. Of course, there should be not only courses in the university, there should be free courses. Like, for example, here in Norway, you can get like community courses. Of course, they're not super good, but at least it is something that people with a low income can have. And yes, there should be also education for Icelandic people. And I'm glad to see a lot of different programs on RÚV recently about immigrants and immigrant status. You know, Eduardo made this whole series about immigrants living here, and there was an episode about Icelandic. I think it's great. So there is definitely change, but it should be more and more probably acknowledgement of this structural discrimination against immigrants in educational institutions, because it's not only about giving them some courses in English, allowing them to reply exam questions in English. It is providing better support and not just focusing on exams or high stakes examinations or tests, especially in education, but allowing people maybe to take oral exams, to do portfolios, to use different assessment methods is what I actually fight for in education, just to provide a variety of assessment methods that are not discriminatory. I hope I replied. If there is something more, just tell me.
No, I think you replied very well. Jón, you've been on both sides as an immigrant who studied Icelandic and as an immigrant who teaches Icelandic. First of all, I would like to know, when you got the position to teach Icelandic, did it make you proud? Was it something that you were like, I can do this. I'm like good enough to do that. But also I'm interested, like, because you teach both in the University of Iceland and in Mimir, is there any difference between people who go to the university or who go to the evening classes? And also, like, what kind of groups are there who want to study Icelandic, and if there are any difference? Like, I know there are a lot of workers who've been living in Iceland for ages. For example, most of people in my class when I was studying in the university were Polish people who've been living here for quite a while, who had basic level and who wanted to improve it. Do you feel like, because we had quite a big increase of immigrants within the last 10 years, this whole time that you've been teaching Icelandic, do you feel that the system adjusted to such a high amount of immigrants who have interest to study Icelandic? So basically, were you proud? What's the difference between Hái and Mímir, and did the educational system adjust to such a big amount of immigrants?
Yes, I was proud. I was also quite daunted, and I wasn't sure I will be able to do it. You know, I think my teaching, both methods and style, have improved since I started to teach Icelandic in 2008. Oh no, actually 2006 or 7 at Mímir. I started in 2008 at the university. So yeah, I was proud, but I was also very daunted. I mean, I remember the first 2 weeks that I started to teach. I walked to school. I walked to work with a knot in my stomach. I vomited twice on the way to work due to stress. But yes, I was proud. The difference in is there any difference between the language proficiency between students at Hái, students at Mímir? Yes, there is, but the goals are typically quite different as well. The students that we get at the university either want to study Icelandic for studying Icelandic's sake, or they want to study Icelandic because they are interested in studying other subjects at the university. So people tend to be at the University of Iceland for academic reasons. They're in a more academically geared, grammatically geared environment where they're exposed to literature, historical linguistics, and grammatical thinking. Whereas at Mímir, the goal really is to integrate people that are here to work. Possibly people, you know, we also get graduate students coming to Mímir, but the focus at Mímir is much more instant talking. You know, we don't have separate grammar classes there. We don't have separate classes for morphology, syntax. So it's all very kind of integrated. So there is, I'm not sure there's a difference in language proficiency, just the people's backgrounds may be different. So I will tend to find that students at Mímir, they speak very colloquial Icelandic, very everyday Icelandic. They're picked up at work. You know, they maybe work in a kitchen, maybe they work on a building site or whatever else. Whereas at the university, people are very much more geared towards the technical aspects of language learning. They're interested in language structure and literature and things like that. So yes, there is a difference, but I'm not sure whether the difference is in proficiency. It's just it's just the culture or the environment in which you're immersed. I think that that distinguishes the two types of Icelandic we see at the University of Iceland on the one hand and Mímir at the other. And what was the third thing? Oh, do you mean as the government reacted accordingly to an influx of foreigners that want to learn the language, or schools, or what do you mean?
Yeah, thank you. I think we are running out of time, so I would like to maybe finish with some advices to Icelandic society and to immigrants who study Icelandic. Like maybe one advice per person, both to Icelanders and to immigrants. For example, I would like to say to Icelanders who who hear accent, who have foreign friends. For example, I think it's important for them to correct people. For example, I know that once I had this conversation with a friend when I was talking about hiking, and he, like, after I finished, he said, "You know what? You said fjallaganga, but it's actually fjallganga." And I was like, wow, I've been using this word for ages and nobody ever corrected me. And I felt like a fool. So it would be really nice if people would correct, because I wouldn't know. Like, I'm so used to say it wrong. So like, I don't even like reflect if I'm saying it right. And for foreigners, I would like to say that it would be like what helped me to study to speak better Icelandic was to start working with kids, as Artёm mentioned. I think it helps a lot. And also it helped a lot to go to the university and study it and have like dedication to your language goal. Richard, what would be your advice?
So my advice to Icelanders would be, don't switch to English just because you hear an accent. You don't know whether the person's a tourist living there, trying to integrate, trying to improve. So stick to Icelandic. If they ask you for clarification, then you may offer, to explain something in English, but it's good to then go back to Icelandic as soon as you can. Because if they're able to communicate basic things, then you should try and do as much as you can in Icelandic. And just because somebody doesn't know a word or a phrase, it doesn't mean they can't go back to Icelandic for the rest of the conversation. So I would say, yeah, be mindful that some people are living there and they have done for many, many years. And I think, like Artёm said, that, yeah, it can feel like you're pushing someone away when you don't include them with the language. So he's absolutely right. So that would be my advice for Icelanders. For people learning the language, I would say Icelandic is a language that's, in a society that maybe they don't have the level of experience as, say, English speakers have, of a multitude of nations learning the language en masse. So sometimes their ears are not always attuned to different accents, different ways of pronouncing words. So sometimes they can be thrown. So sometimes even as a learner, we need to be a little bit patient and understanding that it might not be immediately obvious what we're saying, even though it is to us, to the person listening, because they may have come from Ísafjörður and they don't have a clue, what a French accent sounds like, or what a Hungarian accent sounds like. So if they're hearing Icelandic through that accent for the first time, then it'll take a little bit of time for their ear to adjust. So yeah, they would be my pieces of advice.
Thank you. Anna, what would be your advice?
I'm going to keep this very short because we're running out of time. I'm just going to say to Icelanders, enjoy all the, multitudes of new Icelandic languages, and to, foreigners learning Icelandic, just go for it. And, be patient with yourself, and don't be afraid to, to embark on this language, because it's doable, definitely.
Thank you. Artёm, what would be your piece of advice?
So I will tell very short, and my advices will be for both Icelandic people and immigrants. Just change your mindset and acknowledge your prejudice, because everybody has prejudice, and acknowledging, understanding, and working with them will help to create a better environment, better society, and it will help immigrants to learn Icelandic if they will be more positive and focus on positive elements rather than on negative elements. And of course, it will be better for Icelandic society to embrace this multiculturalism and just be positive towards all people, and treat them as an asset but not as a problem.
Thank you. Jón?
10 years ago, I can't imagine myself, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to imagine myself saying this, but don't get too stuck in the grammar. Don't care too much about your grammar. There are two types of language student. And I remember once I had a student, I won't say what her name is, but she was from Russia, and she'd obviously just learnt the names for different kinds of fruit in Icelandic, the words for different types of fruit. And I was drinking tea, because I only drink tea. And I asked her, "Drekkur þú te? Do you drink tea?" And she answered by telling me that she drank different types of tea by using all of the words for the different types of fruit that she just learned. So, ég drekk appelsínu te, ég drekk epli te. Her grammar was not standard, but she just let it all out, right? And she probably felt great afterwards. And then there's the other kind of language student and linguist who sits there for 6 months trying to put one perfect sentence together, and by the time they're ready to let it out, people have moved on. So I would say, don't get too bogged down in the grammar. Just let it come out, and gradually, with enough exposure, frequency of use will facilitate some kind of osmosis. But people don't care. The worst that will happen to you if you get the grammar wrong is the Icelander will lift their eyebrows, and then it'll stop. Then it'll be over. This relates to another thing. Natasha, you said that you want people to correct you. Great if you want that, but I think wait until someone asks you or gives you permission to correct them, because it can actually you can actually feel slightly affronted when someone assumes the liberty to correct the way you speak when you haven't asked for it. But that's what I would say. And be sassy, right? If you speak Icelandic and someone speaks English to you, just give them the face. Okay, don't let them get away with it. That's my advice.
Yeah, I will practice this face. Yeah, but thank you a lot, everybody. I think it was very interesting and a lot of fun hearing your opinions on Icelandic, and I hope it will help Icelanders and foreigners who try to speak Icelandic, and to create a better society when we can live together ever happily after. Thank you.